Hello everyone, Will here. Well, I have done many tribute videos on this channel, but this one is probably going to be the most emotional. It's 10 years today since we lost one of our best broadcasters, Sir Terry Wogan. I can remember my mum telling me that he'd passed away. It was a Sunday, and Sir Terry, that was his usual slot actually. 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. on a Sunday, Weekend Wogan. And he'd been ill for a couple of months, but yeah, I think it was still a shock to a lot of people. In fact, I'm just going to rewind. So, November 2015, at school I had some free time. We'd finished all our work, and so I went on the BBC Media Centre, and that, it's a press office, a pack of what to expect on the Children Need Appeals show. So I did, and or maybe I went on the BBC News website or something, or I can't remember, it must have been one of those, and Sir Terry Wogan announced that he had to pull out of Children Need due to bad back. And so, yeah. His last edition of Weekend Wogan was on the 8th of November, so that was Remembrance Sunday. And you know what? I listened to what turned out to be his last show, just a couple of months ago, just to sort of see if there were any, or hear if there were any hints. But you know what? There weren't, he sounded on top form, and yeah, it was just an absolute shock. There was no warning really. But yeah. So anyway, yes, he had to pull out Children Need, and so now Weekend Wogan used to share its slot with Richard Madeley. Because when Sir Terry left the breakfast show for the final time, I think he wanted to cut down his workload. He'd stepped down from Points of View, he stepped down from commentating the Eurovision Song Contest, and he was wanted to cut down his workload. So fair enough. And yes, so at that point, now because he had to pull out of his last shows of the run, that means they had to bring Ryan Tubridy, who I think Terry chose to cover him, and then Patrick Kilty before Richard Madeley took over with the Madeley on Sunday usual run. So yeah, it's probably the first celebrity death, if you like, that I really got quite upset about. And I think it was down to two things. One was I'd grown up with him. My mum and dad had grown up with him. So that's two generations, really. The other thing was also when you have the radio on and you hear that voice every day coming through the speakers, it's quite a thing, the power of the DJ, and which is why listeners get quite upset really, and when radio stations change their schedules. And yes, so I remember before, on the way to school, I would get up. I think the alarm went off at 7:30 or something, or just after 7:30. So I got to hear the first few bits of Terry, and then as I was eating breakfast, if I didn't have Bob the Builder, Can We Fix It, which I did, the CD single, I often asked Mum to put it on just before, as I was eating my breakfast. If we weren't that, we were listening to you know, Sateri on Wake Up to Wogan, and it was just the perfect listen. Just absolutely wonderful. And I did like a lot of, you know, I liked a lot of the same music that Sateri introduced us to, all us listeners. You know, Eva Cassidy, who, you know, it was Paul Walters, his producer, who discovered her and heard about her and put her on the playlist. And bizarrely, Eva Cassidy famously became famous after she died. I can't think of anyone else that's happened to. Then Katie Melua and yeah, some other artists that Terry liked. Beth Nielsen Chapman, I remember that. I Yeah, I think he likes Nora Jones. Katie Lang. Katie Lang was a favourite of his. Yeah. Um, yeah, and he just had a brilliant music taste, really. Every time I hear the Bluebells 1980s hit, well, uh, it was a hit two times, once in '84 and the second time in '93, which is probably also why Sateri played it a lot, because '93 was actually the year that Wake Up to Wogan started. Because Sateri had two tenures on the Breakfast Show, one from '72 to '84, and then '93 to 2009. So, yeah, and he always joked it was the anthem of the Togs, because Togs, if you don't know, was an acronym for Terry's Old Geezers and Gals, and you know, young at heart. It was, you know, yes, it was a joke in an ironic way, but yeah, I mean, some of the humour probably went over my head, but I did like Terry's warm, very calming voice. It was like having a warm blanket on you, and you know, breakfast shows, you know, a lot of them do seem to be high energy and very upbeat and you know, often quite hyper these days. But you don't always need that with a breakfast show. Some people like just a gentle mix of music and chat, which was what Wake Up to Wogan was. Um, yeah, and I just absolutely loved listening to it, and yeah, I listened to Sateri's last breakfast show from the 13th of December 2009, you know, for Christmas stuff. And yeah, that was quite emotional listening to that, especially some of the tracks he chose as well. So yeah, before he passed over to, before he passed the baton on to Chris Evans. But it wasn't just radio, of course. Well, he did he did quite a bit of TV. He did his Wogan chat show, which was really popular. He did Blankety Blank. He did Come Dancing. But there wasn't always success. You know, there was Wogan's Perfect Recall, which I remember reading about in the TV guide. But I don't think I actually saw an episode of it. It was on Channel 4. And he also did the Terry and Gabby show, where he hosted it with his Children Need colleague, Gabby Roslin. And in fact, yeah, the Children Need Appeal show as a child, for me, I loved it because there was just, you know, the newsreaders doing their thing, and there was, you know, often a Doctor Who skit, and I just loved the whole atmosphere of it. It just seemed magical when I remember seeing, you know, the BBC Television Centre and Pudsey doing sort of somersaults that projected him onto. I just thought, I want to be in that building. I want to be in that studio, in the audience, or even, well, my dream as a child was to be a television presenter, which I kind of, I kind of get to sort of to fill that dream, you know, doing this. But yeah, and yeah, I mean, Blankety Blank was so funny. Kenny Everett often used to bend Sattel's microphone. It looks like a bit of a wand. It was quite an interesting, not your sort of traditional microphone, because generally you have, well, lavalier mics, they're called, the clip-on mics, and then you have dynamic mics. But anyway, but yeah, it was oh yeah, it was quite funny. And yeah, Blankety Blank, he was absolutely brilliant at that. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, even before he died, he was doing a show called Terry and Mason's Great Food Trip. He brought out a book as well. So, you know, he was very much, pretty much, I mean, apart from the last few months, but pretty much still going until the day he died. And yeah, I can remember the day he died so, or announced that the day he died, because, you know, maybe he died a couple of days before, but then, you know, they wait a couple of days to actually announce it, which often what happens. But well, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I can remember the day it was announced he passed away, and I just I was eating my breakfast in the lounge, and my mum told me, oh, Terry Wogan has died. And I well, it was kind of a mixture of shock and a kind of, well, it was kind of a mixture of a shock and wasn't a shock, if that makes sense. I think, I mean, I remember at the time, you know, I mean, obviously, you know, with Sir Terry having a bad back, you know, we, you know, wouldn't be able to do, you know, Weekend Wogan. I thought, well, because Weekend Wogan and Richard Madeley usually, you know, do 13 weeks each, I thought, well, fair enough, let Christmas get over and give Sir Terry some extra recuperation time. So, yeah. And I remember Richard Madeley saying, you know, Sir Terry will be back next week. And then, you know, he kept saying that week after week. And yeah, I think it probably became clear to listeners that, well, yeah, I think probably maybe we should have all maybe understood that he wasn't going to come back. But yeah, every Children in Need, I sort of have a little tradition, and I play Sir Terry's version of the Floral Dance, which he had a hit with actually in 1977, because on his breakfast show the first time round, he played the instrumental, the Floral Dance, which is actually a big hit. Believe it or not, a brass band in the charts. But yes, that was the diversity of the 70s. Anyway, so Sir Terry would sort of put the record on, and he would sometimes, not always, but sometimes often sing the lyrics to it, you know, just on top of it in the radio studio. And it became so popular that he went into a recording studio properly and actually did it. So yeah, and it was lovely. I was in the car, and I heard Vernon Kay play it, and that did make me smile. And yeah, it's just brilliant. So yeah, Children Need, I play Sir Terry Wogan's The Floral Dance. I play the two singles by his former Radio 2 colleague, the much missed Ray Moore, who was very similar in Sir Terry in style. In fact, when I was watching the last ever Wogan, there was a clip of Ray and his wife Alma, and it was so sad to see that Ray's speech, you know, had gone, because it was after he had to retire from Radio 2 because, you know, of his slurred speech, because he had throat cancer, because he had an agreement with Radio 2 that that when his voice wasn't up to it, he'd retire. Yeah, and sadly, Ray, like Sir Terry, the second time round, didn't get to say goodbye to his listeners. So yeah, and obviously, yeah, there were colleagues on Come Dancing and Children Need as well. So yeah, very very close colleagues. So yeah. And yeah, the Terry and Gabby show didn't particularly go well. In fact, Chris Evans famously remarked that if it didn't go well, that he'd open a market stall. And true to his word, the final episode, the credits rolled, and there he was opening a market stall. Now, I never used to see the Terry and Gabby show. In fact, I don't think I even saw an episode. I mean, you know, we'd have Channel 5 on for House Doctor and you know, a little bit of for Milkshake, but generally. And of course, I was at school at this point. So, yeah, of course, I didn't see the Terry and Gabby show. So, yeah, and I think they had the Johnny Ball doing a few sort of maths or sort of maths added on to financial advice or something. Yeah, I don't really know too much about that, really. But, well, I sort of know bits and pieces of it, but very, very bits and pieces. Yeah. And, you know, since his passing, Radio 2 has changed very dramatically. Sometimes I can't even recognise it's the same station. Yeah, which of course it is. I mean, you know, a lot can change in 10 years. I mean, yeah. But just a wonderful, wonderful broadcaster who is much missed. And well, I said about the Eurovision Song Contest, so we actually did that in two spells. One was commentary for the radio, for Radio 2, and then he took over the TV commentary. Yeah, and in fact, he presented it on stage. So when they held it in Birmingham in '98 with Erika Johnson, Sir Terry balanced the hosting of it in Vision on stage, and still did his commentary. So that must have been a very busy night. I mean, he must have really got his steps in then. So, yeah, and yeah, and that must have been a very, very proud, and probably must have been one of his best nights. The fact that Eurovision was in the UK for Sir Terry, and yeah, and so yeah. And he decided to retire. Well, two reasons. One, because I think he was getting a bit fed up. He thought it was becoming a lot political, which a lot of people still think the same today. And the fact that his producer, Kevin Bishop, was retiring as well. And I don't blame. I think those two reasons, a new producer coming in, and you know, Eurovision becoming political, I think that's very valid why he stepped down. 2008, he also stepped down from Points of View. He took over in 1999 from, it was Des Lynam, I think. Yes, because, yes, Anne Robinson presented it. Then Des Lynam. Des Lynam went to ITV, and then Sir Terry Wogan took over. So, yeah, and was one of Points of View's longest serving presenters, probably the second one would be Barry Took, who for a lot of people associate with it, and still probably. Yeah, but he gave up Points of View in 2008 and handed that over to his Radio 2 colleague Jeremy Vine, actually. So yeah, he took over. And in fact, 2008 was going to be a year, well, was originally going to be the year when Sir Terry was going to hand over the breakfast show to Chris Evans. So it would have happened a year early. So had things gone to plan, Chris Evans would have replaced Sir Terry Wogan in 2009. However, due to the Jonathan Ross, Russell Brand, Saxgate stuff, and Leslie Douglas, the then controller of Radio 2, had to resign, then Sir Terry stayed on for an extra year, more than he was planning to. But yeah, I think if he'd stepped down from points of view, the Radio 2 Breakfast Show, and Eurovision all in 2008, I think he was definitely looking to cut down his workload. He wasn't a young man then, and understandably, wanted to, spend more time with his wife Helen, and I would imagine, and take on some, shorter projects maybe. Yeah, that's probably the best way of describing it. And of course now he's with his wife, Lady Helen Wogan, or the present Mrs. Wogan, as Sir Terry used to refer to her, because and the thing about Sir Terry Wogan generally, it was all about the listeners really. Sir Terry generally wouldn't share, wouldn't talk about his personal life generally on the radio. The only instances was when he had a fire, and more importantly, he wanted to thank the fire brigade for coming, and so yeah, that's probably the only instance I can think of him. I mean, I'm not sure. Do I actually remember that moment? I mean, I remember reading it. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, there's so many Wake Up to Wogan shows, and listeners were so creative as well. I mean, they'd make up poems, and there was this character Chaffer Dandridge, which was absolutely brilliant as well. And now on Weekend Wogan, like the Wogan chat show, unlike Wake Up to Wogan, Sir Terry actually had guests, and when I used to listen to Weekend Wogan, I thought, well, it's a shame. Why could we not have this on Wake Up to Wogan? Although I'm in two minds about that. One, because he didn't need guests, and the stuff that his listeners sent him was incredibly creative and entertaining, like the Janet and John stories, with newsreader John Boggy Marsh, and his interactions with them, and Paul Walters, of course, and later Alan Burlands Boyd, and Alan Dedicote, and Charles Nove, and Fran Godfrey, and Lynn Bowles, of course, or the Totty from Splotty, as she used to be called, and but also Weekend Wogan. I mean, and from watching the Wogan Chat Show, he is a brilliant interviewer as well. So I'm in two minds about that really. Perhaps the perfect breakfast show would have been guests, not every day, but maybe just on a Friday or something. Because I think on a weekday, Sir Terry's gentle humour, mixed in with interviews, plus the Janet and John story. So essentially, Weekend Wogan on a weekday. Would have been my perfect breakfast show. But hey ho, that didn't happen. So it's time to draw my tribute to Sir Terry to a close, and this is an emotional one for me. I don't usually get, 9 times out of 10 when a celebrity passes away, I don't usually get upset about them, but I think I think Sir Terry Wogan, that definitely did hit me. And in fact, I remember on that Sunday, so Mark Goodyear was live with a tribute show where people were telling their tributes and playing some of Sir Terry's favourite music. Then Richard Madeley, who was already due to be on air with Madeley on Sunday, sort of did, well, a very different show. Then Elaine Page on Sunday and Johnny Walker's Sounds of the 70s, they went on ahead. But I do remember, and this made me feel cold, really, because it was a weird atmosphere. And Carmen Squire, who was then, and for many years, the sort of the voice you'd hear on trailers, and now Paul O'Grady, BBC Radio 2, for example, like that. But before the programme started, Elaine Page on Sunday and Johnny Walker's Sounds of the 70s, she said, these programmes were recorded before the news of the death of Sir Terry Wogan, and that made me feel very cold, which, yeah. And then I think the only live show, so apart from Richard Madeley and Mark Goodyear on that day, I think the only live show was actually Claire Chill's Swing and Big Band show. So that must have been quite probably a night that, probably really stands out in her mind in all the history of her radio shows, being only the third live show on a very momentous day, really. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, that must have been a lot of pressure, and I can't remember whether she played some more, because Sir Terry did like his jazz, so I can't remember whether she did, or whether she just sort of said, well, it's obviously been a very sad day, and then sort of just continued on with the show, because she said, well, Sir Terry would want us to continue and not be too sad, and so we will in that spirit. I can't remember, yeah, but a pretty momentous day. I can't believe it. 10 years ago. I mean, 10 years ago I was still at school. I mean, yeah, it's just extraordinary what could happen. What could change in 10 years. But rest in peace to Terry. In a way, I suppose it probably was a good idea that I wasn't on YouTube that much and did tribute when he passed away, because I'm not sure I would have got through it without crying. Because yeah, it was very sad, and it did hit me bad. So yeah, but rest in peace, Terry. Just a brilliant broadcaster, one of the finest. There's a term that Cockneys use, the governor, and he was certainly the governor, or one of the governors. But yeah, just absolutely brilliant. I'll see you in the next one, everybody. Cheers. Bye-bye.